All right, good afternoon, folks. We just have a few folks on here. Maybe some other folks will show up in a bit, but good afternoon. My name's Stephen Jackson. I saw some of you down at High Tech High, and then we've got Matt O'Donnell here, and Alec Patton is also on, who does documentation for High Tech High. Matt O'Donnell is a specialist with us on technology. So he's got a webinar on sort of documentation. We'll have an opportunity to ask some questions as we go along. And we're also recording this, so we'll be able to archive it, and you guys, folks can take a look at it at another time as well. So if there aren't any questions, we'll go ahead and get started.
So we're going to start with the why, and I think Alex got a couple slides, so I'm going to let him take over and share the why you're documenting and who your audience is and what are some of the key points before I start going over some of the tools you might need.
Great, thank you so much. I just shared a link to the project sheet. So there's we got a slide with that on there, but I just shared, put that in the chat, so you should be able to see that for yourself. Can you guys show us? I don't know how I'm going to know when I see a slide.
Yeah, I'll bring the slide up right now.
And I can't hear you guys. I think you guys are muted.
Okay, I'm gonna put the
Awesome.
All right. There we go.
So start kind of four maxims to keep in mind here. The first one is a documentary is a puzzle. You need to make, and actually, if you can just go to the next slide, that sort of expands on that. This is from David Grant, who's the EL Education video producer. That's Expeditionary for Learning, and is a real just an extraordinary resource for documenting projects. He said, when you're creating a documentary, you're making a puzzle that shows people the picture of what you've learned. But while you're doing it, you're actually focused on making the pieces of the puzzle, the photographs, the video, the student work. And I think everything we're going to talk about today comes back to that point about having something that that you're collecting all these pieces, and that has to do with keeping track of where all the pieces are, knowing what pieces you have, knowing what pieces you're missing before it comes into one big whole. Can you go back one slide, Matt? Thanks a lot. Second one, teaching is jazz, not classical music. No one is going to do your project. Nobody's going to go, oh great, you know, on at 11:35 on a Tuesday, I'm going to do exactly the same thing that you did, and that's going to work great. It just isn't. That's not how teaching works. What you're going to give them is a set of, the term in jazz is licks or riffs. You're going to give them a set of little of ideas that they can use and retool and put into their own project. The third one is point the camera at the kids. It's very easy to get into what you're hoping to teach rather than what the students are learning. But you know, if a teacher presents a bunch of things beautifully and nobody actually taking that on or understanding it, that's not actually particularly useful. Is that for anybody? So pointing the camera at the kids, showing those moments of the kids working, those kids learning, making connections, is a lot more powerful. And the final maxim, and this is, I mean, the most important one, documentary does not need to mean video. Shooting video is difficult, it's time consuming. Editing video is difficult, time consuming. Taking photos is a lot easier, and you can take photos, create a slideshow out of photos, talk about your project, interview a student talking about their experience with the project, and have that as a voiceover for the photos. That can be a really powerful documentary, and that is totally fine and legit thing to do. You go two slides ahead. Beautiful, thank you so much. Now this, I shared this in the Documentary Now project sheet. It's you can see it here, but I shared it with you in the chat. So if you go to the chat bit of this thing that's next to people on the right hand side of your screen, that link should work. So you can see that a little better. So the problem we're trying to solve here, the reason you're doing this, is
sorry, just skip that.
Teaching is a jazz profession with classical repertoire. We tend to get a rigid curriculum, which is like sheet music, when we need the melody, the chord progression, and a good knowledge of the licks and when to use them. Our solution is that we're creating this library of chord progressions and licks for PBL teachers. So the chord progression, we're giving the sense of the arc of a project, and then different things you can use within that, different techniques for critique, techniques for managing group work and group time, techniques for engaging with adults from outside the school, content experts. Question, how might we document a project so that other teachers can learn from the experience? And what you're making is your commission to document your project. So as your project is happening, document the important learning events so another teacher could look at what you've made, know what has to be done to do this project, adapt it to their timeline, and they can pick up a few of your tricks along the way. So you want to capture the learning events. So if it hasn't happened already, the project launch is a great one to have. Critique sessions. As I say, if you have times where groups are structuring their group work, exhibitions, field work, having this work. You're also capturing student work that shows students thinking, shows students learning. It's hugely helpful when you hear, if you can actually see, okay, at this stage of the project, this is what students were doing. This is what their work looked like. Really helps to understand as a teacher how to do something, how to do a project effectively. You want to capture reading, writing, discussion, numeracy strategies, interviews with collaborators, and reflection by students and teachers. And I want to say something on that reflection piece right now. Interviews. Think about audio. It's easy to take photos. I mean, relatively easy to take photos. You can take a lot of photos. Students can take photos. It's also relatively easy to capture audio. So one thing you can do is just, if you finish a lesson and you think something really interesting happened, or something that you're grappling with, or you're excited or you're frustrated, whatever it is, just something that's really, take your phone out. If it's an iPhone, turn on voice memos. If it's Android, choose challenge, use whatever app you have, and just talk into it. Talk into it for 2 minutes, for 5 minutes, for 10 minutes. And then you've got that, and you can actually use that could be usable material later on. You may be able to pair that. If you talk through, oh, this is really interesting, it was really cool how we did this, how the students went through this process, you stick it on with that, hey presto, you've got a little documentary. You're not making a whole curriculum based on every minute of your project, and you're also not making a project card. You're not just making something that makes someone go, oh, what a cool thing to do, but doesn't tell them how to, give them any information about how to do it. You're giving them a little bit to work with, so that they can take steal some of your ideas, some of the licks, the chord progression, and make their own thing out of it. The documentary is going to join our brand new online project library, which is so brand new it doesn't exist yet. And I was, full disclosure here, I was going to show you sort of a screenshot of what that was going to start looking like, and I made what I posted what I thought was a photo, and I've got a bunch of like gibberish and code on there on my own. So we are very much in the midst, and it wouldn't really make any sense to show you that yet, but I'm hoping to be able to do that soon. And then, important question that everybody wants to know, when's it due? The Spring Institute is on April 24th, 2019. We'll be putting the documentaries online at that point. If you go just next, I think my last slide is the next one. Yeah. So thinking about this, like we handed these out as like big posters at PBLA. You can also get this one, the timeline. I'll share this as well if you want to use. I mean, this is a very basic timeline. You can make your own, but if you're interested, I just added this to the chat as well. Hoping everyone has access to the chat. But this is, if you're thinking this through, this is the time for thinking about what you're going to capture at which point for this documentary. And there's a little word bank there of things. That's probably stuff you want to be thinking about, the learning events, the deadlines for making a draft. Think about getting your own. I would strongly recommend get your own audit critique. And also when you're meeting with your mentor, those are going to be really good opportunities to possibly record something, do a little interview, share work. Those are going to be obvious kind of inflection points for this. I think that covers what I've got. What I'm telling you guys.
All right.
Yeah, indeed. Oh, and then there's some models, some things. Kind of if you were at the PBLA on that next slide. These are some really nice, interesting examples. I don't think any of them are like perfect for models for what we're doing, but they all have really good stuff about them for looking at ways of sharing and documenting projects and project work that you might that you can use. And then just the final slide after this one is just this is a thing that Randy Shearer is on the call and I designed based on what the website's going to look like. So if you have these boxes filled in, you're going to have something that's going to be very easy to put online and make part of this make part of this library that we're creating. And if you imagine like the first slide here is the rapid prototype design challenge document PBL essentials is left that's like the landing page for your whole project, and those three boxes at the bottom, if you were to click on one of those three boxes, it would open up to what you see on the next page of PBL essential number 1. If you're sort of thinking through the web design structure for that. And that's everything for me. That's everything I got to say. But obviously, happy to answer questions from anybody, chat about anything. But I'm also conscious of everyone's time, and I want to make sure Matt can talk through all the cool stuff he's got, because I really want to learn about it because I don't know it.
All right. Thanks so much, Alec. And we're going to have all of those things in the shared resource folder, which is bit.ly / documenting PBL, and I'll put the link up there at the end, and we'll send an email out with a webcast of this, and as well as a link to the shared resource folder. I think what Alec was saying, it's really important for people to have a system in which they're documenting what's happening. If you're not planning on doing a film or a podcast until the very end and trying to get it all together and trying to go by your memory, it's going to be nearly impossible to get a coherent story together. So it's really important to have a log, some way of all of those key learning events that are happening. And however you do that is going to be up to you. There's tons of different resources you can use, but you have to find a system that will work for you. And when you're doing that, it's also important. So many times as educators, we only want to share the successes. We want to share what went perfect. And when people outside of our group that we're trying to share something with, if they just see something perfect, that almost can be intimidating and make them not want to join and not want to participate because they don't see their students as being perfect. So it's important to show the failure and some of the struggle that your students go through as possible. And if you think about any documentary you've seen that is good, it's going to have some of that failure in overcoming some of the struggles. If you don't do that, you're not going to have a solid story at the end. So make sure you don't just highlight all the great stuff, highlight some of the messiness that you get as well. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is photos. Taking photos is a great way to document your project. And make sure you're not just taking pictures of students, which is great to take pictures of students, but also take pictures of some of the work they're creating, maybe the whiteboard or any charts or anything that they're starting to develop That's important. You're going to need that when you're putting your story together. It's not just going to be pictures of people, but pictures of some of the stuff, because you'll see towards the end they'll have that finished product, but in the middle you want to see kind of the bare bones of what they started with to help you tell your story. And before I move on to the next thing, also make sure you have photo releases from your students, because there's nothing worse than having great stories and great shots of something, and then you find out that 3 of the kids in there didn't have their photo release, and you can't use that photo, and then it's really hard to put that video or that storybook together. So one thing to document student work is an app we like to use. It's called Cam Scanner. It's a way of taking pictures of either a whiteboard or a piece of paper, and it kind of flattens the document and saves it as a PDF or a JPEG, but it makes it much easier to read that document. It's much more legible than sometimes just a straight picture will do. And you can also embed that in your video later on. This might be something you want to use too if you take notes. Maybe at the end of the day, students had some great learning ideas and you want to take note of that in your notebook. If you use Cam Scanner, you can then have a digital copy of it. So if you lose your notebook, if you're at a different computer, you have a digital copy of all your notes. It's better for organization that way. Something similar to Cam Scanner, but a little more robust that I use is this thing called Rocketbook. What's kind of neat about Rocketbook is on the bottom, it's kind of hard to see on this page, there's several different icons, and you can set those icons to go into different places. So if I click the first icon, it might be a special folder for one group's project-based learning thing. So if I take some notes on that and I use the app and scan it, it'll automatically put that scan in that specific file. And I can have different files, or I could have one that says email this to somebody or send a text message with this scan to somebody else. And then once you're done with the pages, you can take a wet paper cloth and wipe them off and reuse the pages again once you fill up the notebook. So it's a pretty good way to keep notes of what you're doing and kind of taking an analog thing and making it digital. Great way if you're taking notes of what the learning was that happened each day. You can make sure it gets put into your Google Drive folder if that's what you're using. For photos, one of the things I highly recommend is using Google Photos. Google Photos is free. If you use the high quality storage, it'll let you do unlimited photos. It'll timestamp all of your photos, and it will back up the photos from your phone automatically. That way, if you go back and you're looking through your notes, you say, oh, we did something on this date. Let me go to Google Photos and find out the pictures that we took that date, and you can have those pictures that correspond with that learning information. It also has some pretty cool search features. You can, search for desk, and it will just bring up all the pictures you ever took that had a desk in it or a dog or whatever it is, and you can even put people's names next to the facial recognition, and then if you type in that person's name, it will bring up all the pictures of that student. So it's a great way to organize your photos later on. If you've taken a bunch of photos that day. You can create shared folders, much like Google Drive. You can have a community folder that students can dump their own pictures into that same shared folder for the project. So it's a great way of organizing your photos. Google Drive can do that, but it does a little more ability to search the different photos than just uploading them to a Google Drive folder. If you are using Google Drive, make sure you and your students get the Google Drive app. That's the best way to upload photos. Here's a screenshot of the Google Drive app, and you'll see that little plus button at the bottom. You have to hit that to select photos from your camera roll. The downside of that is you have to select, the individual photos, whereas Google Photos, if you have that app, it'll back them up for you automatically, and you don't have to go through that step. So it's just, but this way you can put them in the folders you want if you have the Google Drive, the Drive app on your phone. Now,
any questions on those? There's like 3 or 4 tools. Just to reiterate, the scan app, the Google Photos, there was a couple of other ones.
Yeah, Cam Scanner, we use Rocketbook was the other
right,
one.
Yeah.
Google Photos and then Google Drive are all ways to kind of organize your photos, all them photos and information there.
Okay. Can you do videos on those or not?
You can upload video to Google Drive. Google Drive, if you have a school account, will have unlimited storage, so it's a great place to store video. But remember, since it's cloud-based, depending on the Wi-Fi and network speed of your school, some schools have pretty good access. Some schools, it's going to take a long time to download a video, and the higher quality video, now most things are shooting in 4K, will take up a lot of space and a lot of time to download. So just budget that into your time if you're using Google Drive instead of a hard drive for that.
Great.
So let's go on to some video tools if you are going to be shooting video for your project. An iPhone or an Android phone is a great tool. Most people think they need to have to buy a great camera. iPhones right now are shooting in 4K. It's good quality video. The hardest thing I always have to work with students and sometimes teachers is please turn the phone so you're not doing it vertical and you're not going to have those big bars in there, because that's really hard to get a full screen video. You have to crop out half of it. So if you just turn your phone horizontally like you see in that picture, your video quality is going to be much, much better. So make sure anything you're shooting is like that. And remember, it's not stable no matter how hard you can be. So it's okay for some quick shots, but if you're going to do an interview, you're going to want to get a tripod. A tripod is essential for doing that. You can buy adapters to put an iPad or an iPhone or an Android phone on your tripod, which is going to make your video quality so much better. And also remember, when you're shooting video, that the first time you're bringing the camera into the classroom, students are going to be a little freaked out by it, and they're not going to act normal. And they might be your best student who shares a lot of things. They may suddenly go very quiet. Other kids might start acting silly. So just try and get them used to using video, and don't expect the first time you bring a camera out that they're gonna be used to it. So shoot a little more video before the main learning moments. Another thing you might want to consider is getting a GoPro. GoPros have gotten a lot cheaper. You can get one for about $200 for one of the lower end models, and you can put that in your classroom and even have it do a time lapse for each day. And that way, it's great for B-roll. When you're shooting video and you have the audio of people talking about some of those great learning environments, and you don't have any great pictures, or maybe you don't have the full video of what happened in that class, but you remember at a certain time, if you have that time-lapse video, that might be good B-roll to show about what was happening that day. It also just kind of shows student movement throughout the class. And that's a pretty easy thing to set up in there. It's wide angle, so and they're pretty affordable right now. If you are using iMovie, which I would highly suggest if you have a Mac in your school, it's by far the easiest video editing software for people who are not used to or just getting started. I've got a little arrow at the top. iMovie builds in a couple tools that can save you if your quality isn't great. So if you shot something on the iPhone and it's a little bit shaky, the arrow's pointing to the camera, you can have it stabilize your footage a little bit better. So it has that tool built in. It also allows you to do the audio track at the bottom, which you can edit and splice a lot easier. I would recommend that over using the iMovie on the phone or an iPad, even though it may look easier. I think in the long run, you're going to get frustrated with the app version of iMovie, and you're better off using the laptop or desktop version of it. If you don't have iMovie, I would suggest WeVideo. WeVideo is a cloud-based video software. It is that you can't really use the free version. The free version is so limiting. It's going to frustrate you, but the cost isn't that much. So I would suggest purchasing that if you don't have a Mac, if you're using a PC-based or you want to do cloud-based video editing, or if you're using Chromebooks.
I was even able to create a movie in iMovie. It's amazing.
If Steven Jackson can create a movie in iMovie, then you'll be all set. Adobe Spark is another one where this one you don't really need any video editing skills. You're just uploading a couple pictures and some videos and kind of puts it together for you. It does the transitions. It's a really simple way to get started. I would suggest if video scares you, you don't even know where to begin with iMovie, try and do a small Adobe Spark project around something else. Just do something real quick, and you'll see that you can handle that, and that might be your go-to way of documenting what you're doing. Now, there's a lot of tools out there for taking photos together and creating a video, and I'm sure you've seen them all for like birthday cards or whatever, where it goes from one video to another, and they use the Ken Burns effect. And the Ken Burns created that where he was making documentaries and he didn't have video, he just had pictures, and he wanted to show some movement in the pictures. Unfortunately, a lot of companies have taken the the Ken Burns effect and kind of co-opted it to where it's not really doing its purpose. So the purpose of the Ken Burns effect was to highlight a part of the picture and show movement in there to really send the message home. Some of this other software is just zooming from one side to the other, and then it will zoom from the bottom to the top, and it can get really annoying for the viewer if you just put a bunch of photos together and just start zooming back and forth, left and right for no real purpose. So just be wary of that. Even iMovie, sometimes when you put a photo in there, it automatically starts the Ken Burns effect. Make sure you're focusing in on the part of the picture that you really want if you're going to use that effect. Otherwise, I would just turn it off completely. Any questions you have on video?
I was asking if people had them on chat. Sometimes stills work well, sometimes video works well. How do you get it such that kids and the teacher don't get so bogged down in doing the technology that they kind of lose some of the stuff? I wonder if that's part of, planning and sort of thinking about things ahead of time and mapping some stuff out.
Oh, it's absolutely part of it. You have to do, and we're going to get to that in a minute. You have to do the mapping out first. If you're just going to look at all your footage and just put it all into a timeline, it's going to be years of editing, and you're never going to get there. Great. So you have to organize that, and we'll get to that in just a minute about how you can go about organizing before you even start putting in the timeline and using some of these tools.
We also talked, Randy and I did, about an opportunity to maybe, if you missed something, a cool thing happened in a lesson and you weren't documented at that time, you might have a chance to do sort of some video of that or audio of you talking about what they experienced and use, say, maybe some stills in there with that.
Yeah, absolutely. You can, and we're about to go into some audio tools, but you can absolutely go back. But that's why it's really important to document in your notes, even if you don't have any video or audio of it, at least you have a notes of what happened that day. So then if you're going to go back and do kind of a voiceover of some of the stills or some of the B-roll, you remember some of the key things that happened that day, or you remember what students were involved, so you can later interview them and they can talk about what they did that day. If you're not just, if you don't have the video of them actually doing it, they could talk about what happened that day when they were participating.
Great.
So for audio tools, it's really important to have a microphone if you can. Bad audio is going to kill a video. And a lavalier microphone like the one you see there are pretty cheap. They'll work on Android phones. iPhone, you have to have the adapter now. But they're about $25. If you're doing an interview with a student or a teacher, get a microphone because otherwise you're just going to get so much background noise and it's going to be really hard to hear. Even if you're doing voiceover, I would do that. If you can afford a boom mic, that's great. If you're doing interviewing or showcasing a group of people, that might be a little too much. If you're the teacher, you're teaching the class, you're working on the project, to have a whole group of students operating the boom mic may not be feasible. But at least if you're doing interviews, you definitely want to mic up the person that you're interviewing. If you're doing voiceover and you don't have a microphone, one of the things I would highly recommend is this app called Voice Record Pro. It's a free app. It's available on iOS and Android. It has a great compressor in there for getting quality sound. And then built into the app, you can save the audio file right to Google Drive. You can save it in MP3, or there's other formats and as a WAV file or other types of audio formats. It gets high quality audio. So if you want to do a voiceover like that with the phone, that's a great thing to do. You could also use this, at the end of each class period to just do a quick recording of, here's what we did that day. Here's what I think the learning things were to use later on, because it timestamps those recordings automatically, and then you can dump them all into Google Drive. It's a really good app. Now, let's say you were recording something and you got some bad audio. There's a lot of people talking in the background, which tends to happen in the classroom. iMovie does have a tool built in that you may not know about. If you look where the arrow's pointing, there's a little equalizer up at the top. If you click on that equalizer once the clip is highlighted, you can select it to reduce background noise, and by default it will say 50%, and you can go up to like 90%. The voice will start sounding a little robotic and tinny the more you do it, but it is pretty good at isolating the one main dominant voice in that clip. So again, it's a way of kind of rescuing you if you had some bad audio to start with. So don't just throw out a clip because you say, I can't hear, there's too much stuff in the background. You might be able to salvage the audio you had using iMovie. If you don't have iMovie, Audacity is another great one. Audacity is a free program that works on PCs and Macs. You can download it. It's for doing audio editing. You can splice audio. You can change some of the pitch in there and make it a little better to hear. It's pretty easy to use. Tons of resources on YouTube on how to use Audacity. So if you're just going to do a podcast or something like that, that might be the only software you need. And like I said, it's free. When you are making a video, the other thing you want to consider is some background sound. It's amazing how music can change the feel of a video, and you can set those emotions. And I put a couple resources in there. One is the YouTube audio library. And the nice thing about that is their songs are royalty free, and you can search by different feelings. You can search for happy or sad or inspirational or whatever type of thing you want to, the message you want to send home. Just by playing some of that music in the background, it might save you in having to set up the scene too much. Just because people hear that music, they know that that's what's supposed to be happening in that scene. And if you play around with that, you'll get better at using audio in the back of your clips. Freesound is another one, just for sound effects or for background music. You have to register for that, but there's all kinds of audio clips on there that you might want to use as well. And now, as Stephen was saying, how do I get started? I've got all this stuff. What do I do with it? The key thing, there's two different approaches that people will go with. One is to look at their notes and take all their notes and almost like the old research paper way, take note cards and just organize the note cards on a bulletin board and say, what is the order I want to tell the story in? And they'll put those things in order, and they'll take out what they want, and they'll put what else they want in there. And that can work really well. Another way is to write the script. You've got a script of what you're going to say, what the whole thing is going to be, and then to record a voiceover of the project. What happened at the launch, what happened in the middle, what happened at the end, how did it conclude? And then you know exactly what clips you need to pull to match up with that audio. And another way, some people start with storyboarding. Here's the shots they want, and in the storyboard, you are just going to use stick figures. You're going to draw out what the scenes are going to be like. It might be a group of students talking about this. It might be the launch at the beginning, and underneath, you're going to write down some of the things you captured in there. Most people use this before they shoot shots to create what type of film they want to do, but you can also kind of use it to backwards plan if you already have the clips and how your thing might flow. You're doing your movie on a piece of paper before you even start editing. It will save you a ton of time, so you know exactly what you're going to do. I would look at the storyboard, give it to somebody else, have them give you feedback before you start editing, so you're not spending all the time editing. They can say, that makes sense, the story, and they'll ask you questions. Why are you putting that specific scene in there?
And Matt, this may work well, but maybe a couple of times where you think about your entire project and the work that students are doing. And as we've talked about before, I think we talked about it at the Fall Institute, sort of anticipate some of those key learning moments that you may be able to see. Maybe do a storyboard early on, thinking about here's where some of these might be. As you get going, maybe you adjust it, but it might be a nice opportunity to think about that ahead of time, and then that helps you with the design of the project. Are there key things that we're identifying?
Yeah, that you bring up a good point there. There's some problems on both sides of over planning for a video. One is that if you shoot too much footage because you want to capture everything, it's going to be impossible to edit. But if you over plan, maybe it's not going to happen that day. I think I was talking to Alec earlier today. He's like, well, what if that student's not there that day? You're all planning. You hire a videographer, they come in, that student's not there, you can't pay them to come back in. Or maybe the magic happens on a different day when you weren't expecting it. So you have to be a little bit flexible, but that's where maybe a couple pictures or doing a voiceover later on after it happens, and you're not going to capture everything, but you should know there's definitely some moments where some key learning is going to happen. The launch is going to be a big one. Obviously the final showcase is going to be a big one. But in there, when students are just starting, if they're interviewing somebody that's their big interview with somebody outside of the classroom that they're working with, that's going to be a big thing. So how can you anticipate those and plan for those? That's a good point on that one. And here's just another example. Doing it old school, using a whiteboard and post-it notes and doing it that way before you get into editing. I think it's really important to do some analog editing first before you even start touching the video or the photos. The other thing, which is a really hard lesson to get teachers and students, we do a 5-minute film festival here, and even with the 5-minute films, they're always too long to tell the story that they need to tell. And the key thing is to only have in what absolutely has to be in there. How do you cut out all the unnecessary stuff? If it doesn't has to be a 20-second intro scene of the front of the school and the hallway and everything to know that you're in a classroom. You know, the first scene you see students, all the viewers know you're in a classroom, and it's not going to bore them, you know, with all this extra B-roll. So think about that. Think about how can I cut out the stuff that's unnecessary and not make it a bloated film, because that can be very difficult for people to watch. And if your audience is to pick up how this project went quickly, you want to get it in there as quickly as possible, get to the key points, and also keep them somewhat entertained, because we know people this day and age have a much shorter attention span.
Yeah.
So those are a lot of the tools, but more importantly, like, ask for help when I've shared a bunch of stuff when you're in the middle of this. Email myself or Alec, and I can get back to you with some of these tools, how to use them. I could set up a call or a FaceTime or another Google Hangout with you individually to work with some of the problems you might get involved in with these things. Let me stop sharing the screen here. So let's go to some questions that we might have. If we can get them. Do you want to put them in the chat, or is it?
Yeah, some have been in here already, but I could put some chat questions in the chat if people have them.
Yeah, and if Alec, if you have anything else you wanted to add, and I went through a lot of those things quickly. Do we have any
I don't see anything in the chat. So.
No questions.
So I wonder, we talked before also, one of the things, and Alec, you might have some insight here. Randy, if I think you might still be on. The story that we want to tell about these projects is not so much, people can duplicate them, and sometimes they try them and they don't always work. But the deeper sort of learning, the more impactful kind of experience, I think, for folks is, as Randy's talked about also much more eloquently at times, is it's about helping inspire folks and other teachers to be able to think a little bit differently about their project, to take some of your thinking and your ideas and your experiences and then go and make it their own, so it becomes their own. So when you think about your documentation, it's not a recipe for how to do your project completely. It's more of a story about, wow, this is what we were able to get our students to engage in. This is the learning that happened. These are the challenges that we struggled with. These were the opportunities for us to exhibit our work and to engage with industry or community folks. These are the things that really made our project impactful in terms of learning for students. I don't know, Randy, if you want to share anything about that. He may not be on right now, so.
Already here.
I'm sorry.
That's cool.
I'm sorry. I had a coworker talking to me just then. I literally just turned away the last second.
No worries. I was just talking, Randy, about the thinking about inspiring folks to take, not that we make the documentation of our project a recipe for duplicating what we've done, but so that folks can understand the project, the type of work that students were engaged in, and to inspire them such that they take some of these ideas and create things that are their own, or take it and make it their own.
Yeah, well, our hypothesis, or I think really our theory at this point, is that great projects have a few engines that drive them. And people see a project, when a teacher sees a project, they're probably seeing something that's very rich and complex and diverse. And what we want to do in this documentation effort is direct their attention to the engine that's really driving that project. So if a project becomes fantastic because of authentic field work, we need to make sure that teachers who are picking these documentation kits up and running with them do not skip out on the field work. Mm-hmm. Or if a project is great because the students have a good connection to the community partner that is receiving their work, then we need to make sure that another teacher who tries this project doesn't try it but think, oh, I don't need the community partner, that's too hard for me, or something like that. And that's been our experience at HTH in terms of sharing projects, is that it actually is very easy for teachers who take a complicated project and try to run with it. It is easy for them to maybe miss what an engine might be that's really driving student learning in their project, because projects are so dynamic. And that's really where I'm hoping that we can focus our attention on, is sort of like the highest leverage, highest value, biggest bang for the buck parts of the projects.
I like that idea. And many times,
does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think many of the things that I've seen where there's some really powerful experiences for students are in those times when they've struggled through something and discovered the answer. There's times when they've been able to engage with community partners in a learning activity, and they see their stuff, they're getting feedback from them. The fieldwork opportunity that you talked about, Randy, those are exciting and impactful things that not everybody thinks about doing in a project. And so those are key things perhaps to document as well.
Yeah. Well, also, I think the reason why I'm really kind of like emphasizing that is we have had folks see projects here at HTH and say, here's like two examples that I've actually worked with from a real project. So we had a project that relied heavily on a community partner, and we've had several different schools try to do the project themselves, and some of the schools say, hey, the community partner part of it is just too hard for us to do, so we're going to take that part out of the project. And then what happens is the project falls down, it fizzles. We've had others say, we get it that it's the community partnership that drives this project. We can't do it on the same timeline or with the same schedule, or we can't do literally the same community partner. So we're just going to modify that part, but we're going to keep it. And even if they modify it, when they keep that essential ingredient in the recipe, then it works.
Yeah.
And that's really why I want us focusing on these like core whatever the metaphor is, whether it's essential ingredients or the engine that drives the project or something like that. And to Alex's point earlier in the very beginning of the podcast, rest of the webinar, Alec and podcast are synonymous in my mind. Earlier, he was talking about knowing when moments or predicting when moments of key learning are going to happen, and then pointing the camera at the kids. That gets at both of what Stephen, what both you and I are saying. Yeah. If someone can be pretty good at predicting when the key moments are, whether they're using the storyboard template or whatever plan, and then they point the camera at the kids, then Stephen, then they capture what you just described, which is how students struggle through these like really rich parts of the project and how learning really happens.
Yep. Yeah.
I think actually then, by pointing the camera at the kids, maybe that's what will really help folks know this is the engine that's driving the project, and then maybe more people will those. I'm really mixing my metaphors. More people will keep those key ingredients in the recipe. We've got a recipe that gets put in the engine. I mean, I used to be a humanities teacher, but no one can tell right now.
Oh no, that's good stuff. That's great stuff. No, it's exciting, and we don't often see students struggle through these things, but it's certainly what we experience in teaching. So that's phenomenal. There's a couple of folks on the phone that I'd like to get an idea of who you are and what schools you're from or programs you're from. If you could share. No, that's okay. All right. Any other questions that folks have? I haven't seen anything in chat.
I'm kind of like imagining if I were one of the people who was like one of the people not on the call whose like name wasn't on the slides, and I like there's like a lot to take on right now. So I want to kind of add one thing, which is like just try it. Like I think like a lot of our stuff, a lot of the theme of this like past 45 minutes has been like, don't do this. If you do this, it probably won't work. You'll really be screwing up if you do this. And like, it will be a gift to everybody if you make a really garbage slideshow or a really garbage video really soon and share it with your mentor. That is the best thing you could possibly do. because like then everyone can go, oh, okay, well, what's working, what's not working, how are you gonna do this? And if you're going like you're listening, you're like, how do I know when like a learning event's happening? Like I haven't done a project before, I haven't done very many. I don't know if I go like, and if you said to me like, Alec, next time you design a project, highlight all the learning events, I'd probably like immediately have a stress reaction and start sweating. But I think like you're gonna get way that you'll get better at that, and the way you'll get better at predicting that stuff is by doing it. Like every time I've ever had a student who wanted to be a filmmaker, I've always said, have you made a film? And they're always like, well, not really yet. And I always say, make a film now, because your first film's gonna suck. And your terrible first film, you should make when you're 15, not when you're 25. Get it out of the way, and you're gonna learn so much, and you're gonna move on from there. And so I really think like, like get out, just try doing something, and like, you know, take a bunch, you know, I know like I'm gonna kind of like slightly argue against everything we've said, like take a bunch of photos that might be terrible and put them in the wrong place and then figure it out. Like don't be paralyzed into like not like giving this stuff a try. The way you're gonna figure it out is by trying it and have something be not that good and screwing up, and sitting down with your mentor and your colleagues and your students, especially your students, and saying like, hey, let's take a look at this and figure it out.
Yeah, and one of the things, you know, when I work with teachers a lot on developing films, is they take their own expertise out of it because they get so intimidated by the technology, where they're worried about the transitions and the audio, like you said, but they miss the key point, which is story. And every teacher can be a good storyteller. Every teacher knows what makes a good story. And if they just focus on that part of it, it doesn't matter which tool they're using. If they're just using audio, if they're just using photos, if they're using a video, if they have a good story and are highlighting those key things, even if it's just a PowerPoint, it's going to be good in the end. That's going to be much better than some overly produced thing that really doesn't have the content you're looking for.
And also, I think that, as we talked about before, there's opportunities to, you know, do your own sort of voiceover of some stills that you saw, or what excited you about the learning that you saw students doing, or the work that they did. And even if you don't get that captured either in video or on film somehow, or on a picture, you have an opportunity to go back and record yourself talking about that. If you keep logs of the things that you're noticing that's going on, it's a way to go back and say, oh, okay, we want to make sure that we can find a way to capture, or at least demonstrate that went on. So what are the things that are exciting you about the things you're watching students do, or seeing that they engage in, or the things that they're experiencing? That might be a guide to be able to figure out, oh, that we got to get that. And you can do it in different ways. Could be pictures, could be video, could be student work, could be a time for you to narrate what you saw and what you experienced, and that video goes on, some text. So we'll have lots of opportunities on the website that Alec talked about to be able to upload several different artifacts of that tell that story.
And on the thing that Randy was saying about the engines, totally like agree with all that. On the thing about the kind of like, what are the engines of the project? What is the important stuff? What are the key things that you can't lose? The students know that. Like your students know what they're excited about. They know what they're engaged about. If you've got a student working hard on the project, they know why they're working hard on the project. So the easiest way to find out, well, what's really driving this thing, what's making it work, is to ask students. Mm-hmm. Which I mean is always worth doing. But you know, if you ask students and you've got a mic putting it, then we're all going to have that. That's going to be helpful. And if you've got anything, if you've tried making anything and you feel like you're like, maybe this is cool, maybe this isn't cool, maybe I'm doing something awesome, maybe it's garbage, I just don't know. Like, please email it to me. I'd love to take a look at it. And like, you can just say like, if you say like, hey, like, I really want to know, like, give it to me straight. I want to know what's like what's going on. I can kind of put that hat on. If you're like, just tell me this is pretty cool, I can be like, hey, this, you know, you can, depending on how you're feeling with it, like I can give you kind of the feedback you need. I'd be really happy to do that. And I'm also just like super curious to see what you guys are doing. So please like send me stuff. I'd love that.
Great. Well, if anybody has any burning questions, we got some experts. Somebody's trying to talk. All right, you can also put them in the chat if that works as well, or you can email them to Matt or myself or Alec. We can certainly get answers for you. But thank you all for participating. I want to thank Matt and Alec for your expertise and sharing this. As I said before, we're recording this, so we'll put it up and we'll send it out in the weekly emails that come from Randy. So you have a link to view it if you didn't get a chance to here. Oh, Michelle, okay. I agree with that. All right, wonderful. So thanks for everybody for participating, and we'll be doing another one coming up. It'll be sort of authenticity and career tech education, and I think it's January 24th. So that should be exciting. Maybe folks can participate in that. Have a great holiday. I hope you guys all